name, but I recognize most names, I believe, on the call. So you probably know me. I'm Katie Percy. I have been the programs chair for the Baton Rouge Audubon Society for the last 3 going on 4 years, I think. It's not intended to be a position and it's a volunteer position. So I didn't intend to keep it forever. If anybody wants a stab at this volunteer role or know somebody else that might be interested at any point in time, you're welcome to volunteer and I will relinquish these duties. But then I'm also staffed with our state office in Louisiana as an avian biologist. And then I also volunteer as the compiler for the Baton Rouge Christmas bird count, which is why I figured for December we would go ahead and talk a little bit more about Christmas bird count, and in particular Christmas bird counts in Louisiana, and then specifically the Baton Rouge count. Any questions from anybody before I get started?
Katie, I've never done a Christmas bird count, so are you going to kind of go over what's expected and what the basics are?
I am. I'm going to go over just briefly the history of, and then I'll get into the basics, just real basics of being a participant in the Christmas bird count. And then I'm going to give some examples of how the data has been used over the years, and then talk a little bit more specifically about what we're doing this year in light of the pandemic. And that's about it. All right, I am sharing my screen. Can someone just let me know if you're seeing the presenters mode or the full screen presentation mode?
Full screen presentation.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Okay, so the Christmas bird count was something that was proposed by Frank M. Chapman, who was a very reputable ornithologist in his day. And this was proposed as an alternate to the tradition at the time, which was known as the side hunt. And that was really just a competition to go out and hunt on Christmas Day. And it was noticed even during that time that the way that hunting was occurring was not particularly showing great sportsmanship. It was a trophy hunting event and an all-out kind of killing spree where more was being hunted than was actually used for fur or meat at the time. So Frank Chapman proposed a Christmas bird census, which would be a non-consumptive count of avian species by all individuals seen and heard on Christmas Day. And that is what Frank Chapman proposed in Bird Lore, which is what I've pulled just a screenshot of what he wrote in 1900. And then that is the magazine that did eventually become the Audubon magazine, which is still published today. And in that year, there were 25 Christmas bird counts and a total of 26 observers across the United States. Since then, it has grown tremendously and probably beyond Frank Chapman's wildest expectations. It covers most of the Western Hemisphere. And I will ask that everybody else on the call mute themselves, please, unless you have a question. But I am picking up a little bit of background noise from somebody. So again, the count has probably grown beyond wildest expectations from the early 1900s to now in its 121st year, which hasn't technically begun the count window. And I'll get a little bit more into what that specific count window is. But last year, which was the 120th Christmas bird count season, there were 2,646 count circles and 81,601 observers. That's the total count that was actually submitted and accepted in the database for last year's count period. And now this year we are in the 121st year, which will begin in a few more weeks. So here's just an idea of Christmas bird count circles on the map. They all look like they're overlapping right now because I'm just zoomed so far out. I wanted you to see how much coverage we have throughout the United States, but now throughout Central and getting into South America. So this spread again throughout the Western Hemisphere. If you zoom in more, that same map, and you can view that map on the main Audubon Society Christmas bird count webpage. And so in that map viewer, you can zoom in, and all I've done, instead of sharing the website and trying to click around, I just took screenshots. So that's all I'm sharing in this PowerPoint right now. So you can zoom in on your area of interest. And so I've zoomed in on Louisiana. Now you can actually see that none of the Christmas bird count circles overlap one another. So you're counting birds in different areas. And then if you zoom in further on, say, Baton Rouge, so that's what I'm showing on the left side of this screen. And when you click on that circle, a pop-up will appear. It'll tell you the name of the location and who the circle compiler is. So I'm listed as the compiler for the Baton Rouge count. And then I was also showing the New Orleans count has Glenn Outset listed as the compiler. And usually compilers have added their contact information, and they may have updated the comments with each year, or the comments may stay the same year after year. And most counts, if I go back, if you look at the map again, you'll see some of the circles are in different colors. So red means that they're closed to public participation for whatever reason. They might be on an army base, so there's only selected individuals that are allowed to count within those circles. And then also this year, because it is a pandemic year, some people have opted. I haven't, this isn't the most up-to-date map of Louisiana. When I looked earlier today, I saw that other people have also closed their counts because they're not taking as many public participants this year, since we are social distancing and some of the compilers already have enough people to cover their area. So they're cutting down how many people are allowed to participate within their circle. The Baton Rouge count is still open to additional participation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but you can count just within your yard or neighborhood and do that with fewer individuals or just your family members. So because I figured most people on this call are probably closest to the Baton Rouge circle, this is what that actual map looks like. It is centered on Gardier Lane and Highland Road. And then the map, and then it spans out 7.5 miles from that center. That's the radius, so it's a 15-mile diameter. And that's what all CBC circles are. So it's a standardized area size per circle that you're counting within. And that's too much territory for a single individual to cover. So that's why it's really important that you have a minimum number of people to cover all of that area adequately. And then within the Baton Rouge circle, you can see how we've further subdivided the circle into specific areas. So those are outlined in red and numbered. And year after year, you tend to have the same participants and then additional new participants. And typically I would pair more novice birders or people who are new to the count with other, what we call area leaders. So people who are participated in the count before and are really familiar with their area, and they're really familiar with the Christmas bird count protocol, and they can usher new people along. So more about that basic protocol for a CBC. The window is the 14th of December through the 5th of January. And any one CBC circle is just counted one time within that window each year. And so per the Baton Rouge tradition, we host our Christmas bird count on the last Saturday of that count window. So this year that's going to be the 2nd of January, which is actually in the new year. And a count on a day is considered the 24-hour day length. So you can record owling hours. You can count before or after sunrise and sunset and actually try to pick up nocturnal species. A lot of people typically begin their count at sunrise or shortly after and count until they've either covered their entire area or until sundown. As I already mentioned, every single CBC circle has a 15-mile diameter or a 7.5-mile radius. And everybody is recording at least the area leader is keeping track of the number of observers within their area, the duration that they are counting, so the time that they are together versus the time that they are apart, and then the form of travel. So you can either travel by foot or in car, and that's obviously going to make a difference on what you're detecting if you're recording species while you're inside of your car versus outside of your car. So the second that you're outside of your car, you need to be taking account of that and recording what time you are transitioning from one mode of transportation to another. And then in some circles, some people may actually be traveling by boat, so kayak or canoe or a power boat. You're also taking account of weather conditions. Now, if we have extremely poor weather, particularly heavy rain, we will have to cancel the count. And so we'll either shift the count forward or back if we're just totally rained out. And then there's additional reporting for rare species. So any CBC Circle compiler is also going to share a species checklist with everybody who's going to partake in the count. And on that checklist for that area, they should have highlighted in some form, either bolding or all capital letters, the rare species. So alerting anybody who's participating that if they see one of those species, then they need to take note and include additional documentation just so that we can validate the actual species that was detected. And then those are also submitted to our Louisiana Bird Records Committee. And then if you don't want to cover a larger area, you can also do what is considered a feeder watch. So specifically for feeder watches, you're not actually moving around, so you shouldn't be logging distance, but you would be logging how many hours and how many people are actually watching a feeder. And you don't want to keep tallying your chickadees throughout the day, but instead have just the maximum number of chickadees that were ever seen at a given point in time. And if anybody is interested in participating and hasn't done so before, and even those who are participating again this year, I always send out all of the more comprehensive protocol documents. And if you ever have any questions, then you can always get in touch with me and we can go over some of these specifics in more detail. All right, and then for this year, these were the COVID-19 guidelines that initially came out. So it said wait until November 15th, which is already passed, obviously, to confirm that your CBC will take place. So we went ahead and decided that Baton Rouge would host our CBC because we think we can still do so within local regulations. And we're going to cancel all in-person compilation gatherings. Traditionally, for those who haven't taken part before, we would gather at the end of the count day to do a really quick species call out, just not to get an idea of the total number of individuals that were recorded within the day, but at least to have an idea of how many species were recorded within the day, just because it's fun information for everybody to have right away. Instead of doing that in-person compilation gathering, I will send out a Zoom invite and we'll gather just like we are right now over Zoom. We can either do it at the end of the day or we can do it the next day. I'll just see what the preference is from everybody that participates. And then of course, we're recommending that everybody follow safe social distancing practices and or you're wearing masks if you're in close proximity to other people. And then we don't want anybody to carpool with anybody that is outside of their current like family group or social pod, people that you're already around and you feel comfortable actually carpooling with, because it's something you're already doing, but it's not something that we are requesting anybody do on account of trying to move around an area for the Christmas bird count. And then as I already mentioned, we're trying very hard to comply with just current state and local recommendations. Okay, on to some of the most fun part, I think, about the Christmas bird count is just knowing how this data is used, because it has become such an enormous community science effort, and it is one of, if not the longest running wildlife monitoring events. And so at this level and with this amount of data and for this long period of time, it has been, the data has been used in over 300 peer-reviewed articles. The EPA has made use of Christmas bird count data, as has the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And then most recently, or at least rather one of the more recent journal articles that was published in Science was, I believe it's the one I'm having, this article published in Science titled Decline of North American Avafana. So this one was actually picked up by the press, and there was a lot of publicity behind this decline, because in Science and what this analysis, and this analysis didn't just use Christmas bird count data, it also used kind of the sister data set from Breeding Bird Survey, which is also largely collected by volunteers. And then in addition to some additional data sources like Nexstar Radar. But still, Christmas bird count data was a large chunk of what got this group of scientists at the estimation that we have lost approximately 2.9 billion birds since 1970. And so that is a little over 1 in 4 birds gone in the last 50 years, which was not, this decline was certainly not unknown to a lot of people, but the rate and this large number still shocked many. But it also put some proof behind what a lot of people had been saying or feeling or sensing from even just the decline in birds and certain bird species around them. So again, this one got a lot of press, and in that Science article, which is also a very reputable peer-reviewed scientific journal. So the article is accessible online, and if you have any trouble finding it and want to actually read that entire article, feel free to reach out to me and I can get that to you, or I can drop a link in our chat whenever I finish. But then you can also visit this 3billionbirds.org, where there's a bunch of the different additional information and a bunch of additional graphics that have accompanied this research, which I could give a whole presentation on just this because it was so fascinating. But in the sake of time, I was just going to stop there with this particular article. And then also just highlight that Audubon scientists have also used Christmas bird count data for their climate reports. And a more recent report called Survival by Degrees, 389 bird species on the brink, was showing that 2/3 of North American birds are at risk of extinction from global temperature rise. And this is also publicly accessible information. This is just a screenshot of the bobolink and the projected land change. I know this is kind of small for probably what's showing up on your screen, but if you even just do if you use the Audubon website and you can search by species and see what these different projections are per species for the individual species where there was enough data to make these sort of large landscape level projections. Okay, and then additionally, if you want to just see what Christmas bird count data alone, because again, with that Audubon Survival by Degrees, additional data sets were used to produce those projections. But individuals can also go to the Audubon Society, National Audubon Society website and specifically search for Christmas bird count information. And then you can find a little tile that looks like this with the redpoll warbler photograph next to Christmas bird count trends viewer. And then you can also do some species searches within that trends viewer to see what particular species of interest may be doing based on Christmas bird count data alone. So this is what the trends viewer used to look like, and I didn't want to be too doom and gloom with all of the species and bird population decline. So I picked an individual whose population has been increasing and across the continental United States, Canada, and Alaska. So this is what the trends viewer used to look like when you put in, and on the left side of the screen, you would do a species search and you could select a unit, either a landscape conservation cooperative, a bird conservation region. I clicked on state or province level, and then you could also do a national level. And this is just showing the increase across its entire range, which is represented by blue. And then you have your confidence intervals. So your degrees of uncertainty are also represented here. So this is what the trends viewer used to look like, but then not that long ago, I mean, a few weeks barely, there was an update. So I recently went back to the trends viewer and saw that this is now what it looks like. So it gives a little bit more information. It looks a little bit different. If some of you have played around with the older trends viewer and perhaps weren't aware that it's gone through this kind of major revamp, but it's still similar in that you would put in the specific species on the left hand side of the screen that you're interested in. You still select the geography that you want to explore, and then you can also further select a time period. So if you want to see for the data set that's in the database, the entire 50-year history, so the 50-year trend, or the closer to like 30-year trend, or just the last 10 years and what's been happening in a specific species. So I switched over to brown pelican, our state bird, which was completely extirpated, so didn't exist within this state at one point, and has also been seeing an increase, particularly since the banning of DDT. And then you can click within that map. So it's showing you the colored blue, again, being that the annual percentage change. So this species population has actually been increasing. If it was in red, the population would be showing a decrease over time. And then you can further select a state and see what is happening in your specific state of interest. And so we've been seeing this 19.8% increase in brown pelican populations per year over the length I have selected since 1970. And then this is for survey wide. Over here are numbers for what has that population been doing at the survey wide level. So it's been increasing at 4.97%. And then again, you have your upper and your lower confidence intervals, as well as the abundance graph at the bottom right. And that is already it. I said this one would be a relatively short presentation. So there is my personal contact information, as well as our National Audubon Society, Audubon Louisiana, and Baton Rouge Audubon Society websites. And if anybody has specific questions, I'd be more than happy to field those. And we can also talk specifically about the Baton Rouge count if that's of particular interest. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing just in case there are comments in the chat, which I wasn't able to see while I was sharing my screen. And if you would like to use your mic, you're welcome to. Just note that it is being recorded. So as long as you're okay being recorded.
Katie, let's look. Do we need to register as to who is going to be observing, where we're going to be? Tell us about what we need to do, and do we need to do this on the Audubon bird website, or I'm not participated before it. Give me some instructions as to how to start.
Right. So are you talking, if you're, for any circle that you want to participate in, you need to be in contact with that circle's compiler. And so if you're
Okay.
interested in participating in the Baton Rouge count, then you and I will need to discuss that, because as I mentioned, I compile for the Baton Rouge count. So
Okay.
that would be who you would talk to.
Okay.
But if you recall, were you, Luke, were you on earlier when I showed the CBC map of where all the circles are?
I did. And I've not done this before, but I do lots of, as I think you know, I do lots of deals, but we've got a couple locations, and I'm happy to put together some people to go to some of our spots, and they're all within the circle, and I just trying to figure out how to get started.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna send you the map, and anybody else who's on this call and wants me to email the Baton Rouge circle, so you can tell, well, okay, and I'll do that one, because if you live within the circle, then you can do, as I mentioned, just a yard or a feeder watch, or perhaps your neighborhood, if your neighborhood isn't covered by the area leader. But Luke, if there's additional areas that you're interested in covering, what we have to do is make sure that you aren't covering an area that has already been assigned to somebody, because the point in doing that is that we aren't double counting individual.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah, no, I'm interested. And they probably are assigned. I just haven't done this before, but every week I do LSU aquaculture and I do garden. Over at the Museum and Gardens on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
And so I'll need to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, and so in that kind of situation, Luke, and this is the kind of question that I get all the time, so it's a really good one. I'm going to put you in contact with the people who normally cover that area. And again, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, you might partner up with them, but instead perhaps you'll stay separate and just delineate where within the area you want to cover and where they'll cover. So you guys can still stay separate, but make sure that all of that area is counted, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Good. And look forward to seeing you on Zoom on Saturday.
Indeed, where we all live these days.
Have you heard from several of the area leaders, Katie, or have you gotten much response yet this year?
Yeah, and it's been decent for Baton Rouge, but it's certainly, a lot of people are choosing to not take additional novice participants, people that they don't know. So choosing to just bird, and as we're recommending, just themselves and maybe a family member. But I have had some response, and I listened to Luke, is it Luke LeBaron? The director for the Christmas bird count. So he gave Geoff LeBaron. He gave a presentation just mentioning also that if you have so few participants that you think you can only cover half of your circle, he's going ahead and saying he thinks it's worth it. If you can still cover half of your circle and people are willing, then go for it. He thinks it may be interesting to have that comparison in what will likely be a low effort year to have to compare to the years of higher effort. So we shall see. But if it gets noisy or really messy, and whether or not they keep, who knows what'll happen, or it's earmarked like so many things for 2020.
There's so much data, they can get rid of a lot of noise through the stats. So I think it'll probably, for a lot of counts, it'll probably work pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, Louisiana dealt with that post-Hurricane Katrina to some degree.
Katie, this is Terry. I have a question. It's kind of a logistical question. The count takes place on one day. So if you want to participate in the count, or do you need to count from sun up to sundown, or do y'all break it into shifts, or how does that work?
Right. So the objective is just to try to get full or nearly full coverage for the entire circle. So it's just kind of how much time that takes. But if you want to count and you can only count for X amount of hours, well, you're permitted, just let me know ahead of time, or the area leader that you're working with, to just say, hey, I can join in during the morning hours, but then I got to cut out by midday. That's fine. I mean, you're not obligated to count for the entire 24 hours or even sunrise to sunset. A lot of people do choose to count from sunrise to sunset and then log additional nocturnal owling hours, but that's not required of every participant. That's up to you.
And is it a two-person team?
No, if people feel comfortable birding by themselves, and comfortable in the sense that they can identify nearly all species by sight and sound, but you need to just be honest that if you don't think you can do that, then that's when traditionally I would pair you with somebody. But this year, unfortunately, that may just mean that you can't participate this year, but hopefully things are back to normal next year, and then we'll go back to partnering novice birders and people that are new to the CBC with people who have done it before, and with people who can identify nearly all species.
Yeah.
So Katie, oh, sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Well, so if you don't feel like you're going to be able to identify all the birds you see, then you shouldn't participate.
Let me ask my question, because it may help with that. It'll give Katie a different, a sort of broader response. So my question, I guess, Katie, is if an experienced birder can talk to a novice birder and they both feel comfortable with maintaining social distance, masks the whole time, and trailing each other in separate cars, is that encouraged? Or, I mean, because to me, that would take a fair amount of trust that someone else is as careful as I am, but is that encouraged to allow novice birders to participate, or is it really better just to be solo people in parts of areas?
I'm not going to say it's encouraged. What I'm telling people is it's up to you. I'm not telling you can't do that. The main recommendation through the national guidelines were just that you don't carpool. But then once you're outside and birding together, that you wear masks and you socially distance. And if that prevents individuals from seeing certain species or whatever, I mean, that's going to restrict it. Or you're going to be inclined to get particularly close because you're trying to point out a bird in a tree, and sometimes that's what's required. But we can't, I'm not policing any of that. So I'm leaving that up to individuals to let me know what they're comfortable doing.
Okay. And Katie, another logistical question. Like I said, I've never done this before. And just since you're having a low effort, I guess what I was thinking at the bird count you had, when I just heard today about, the pairing up. So do you have one person that's a really good birder, and then one person is like, you might think of as the scribe, that keeps the list?
Mm-hmm.
So that would, in a case where you have a low effort, you don't have many people participating, is there a way we can help in just being a scribe? Of course, being social distance, not carpooling. But like if somebody says, well, I don't mind having all these birds, but I'm not going to be able to write them all down. How am I going to remember I saw 300, red-winged blackbirds and 25 house sparrows or whatever? So you know, if somebody, I guess I'm saying if there's a new novice birder or somebody that's not confident, like I can't tell between a, you know, a sedge wren and a winter wren or something like that. Is there a need for that? If somebody's a need for that?
Yeah.
But I live in Metairie, so I can't do like sun up to sundown, of course, unless I go stay in a hotel. Which that's why I was asking that logistical question too.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly what some of the novices do help with, is some people like to call out what they're seeing and somebody else is primarily the note taker. So if there is an area leader who likes to have that kind of assistance, then that's who I would normally partner you with.
But we're not doing that this year because of COVID.
Right, unless people feel comfortable doing that. But most area leaders are letting me know that they'd prefer to either go solo or stick with just their family members.
Katie, every Tuesday morning, Dr. Keeney and I go out at Bird Museum and Gardens. We usually end up about 40 species, plus or minus 5. Every Thursday morning, Dr. and I go out to LSU Aquaculture. We usually end up with 60 species, plus or minus 4 or 5. We'd be comfortable taking a couple of people, but I don't know if other people are already assigned to those areas or not. So we'll just need to talk to those areas. But as long as they provide their own transportation, once we get outside, it's in a small group, it's easy enough to split up and maintain distance.
Yes. Yeah. So Luke, anybody, I mean, I'm going to follow up with you after, probably tomorrow. So I'll touch base on
Sure, that'd be great.
That you normally bird, and I'll let you know who covers those areas.
Okay.
And the other thing that you can do is if rare species or individuals are detected 2 or 3 days before the count, I should have double checked this, and a few days after the count, the individuals aren't included, but if it's a species that wasn't detected on count day, then you can still include at least that the species was detected within the count week. And so it's an additional note that does make it into the database.
So Katie, would the best thing, if you want to participate as a, you know, a helper, I guess I'll put it simply like that. Should you contact the compiler and then she'll pass it on and say someone's willing to be a helper if anybody wants help?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And just basically a driving distance place, you know, like not Lake Charles, but, you know, I go birding Holman and stuff. I was thinking to Thibodeau, but I unfortunately have to work that day. So, but anyway, I'll be happy to help with that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I do know some birds. I couldn't stop. And then, of course, I imagine if you're the note taker and you spot a bird, you're allowed to say, "Look, there's a red-winged blackbird," before the expert person saw it.
Well, exactly. So there's species that you know, and any one individual is not going to be able to see 360 around them.
Right.
So it helps to have spotters, extra people pointing out species that you do know, or just pointing out that you see a bird and something for, if you can't identify it, for the other person in your group to hopefully see and identify.
Oh, see, I'm making an assumption it's just 2 people. So there's actually more than 2 people that are covering an area at the same time?
Yeah, well, traditionally, any given area could have several people covering it, either together or splitting up to further break down that territory. And then you may come back together and bird together for a while and maybe split up again. So it's all it all changes a little bit by group and area that you're in. And again, all of that is recorded the entire time that you're doing it, so that effort is accounted for.
Good. All right, so that at this point we just email, we go to that map. I'd actually found that and just email the people. Is that up to date? Like I noticed the Grand Isle, it's not Casey anymore. It was Mr. Brantley.
You'll know if they updated their information if the date, the scheduled date for that Christmas bird count is for this season. So if
Okay.
you're doing something in December of 2020 or January of 2021, then they must have updated it.
Okay.
It'll be out to date and give you a date from last year if that compiler didn't go in and update it yet.
So Baton Rouge just has one circle, but I noticed like the North Shore in St. Tammany has 2 circles. So how do you just contact both of the St. Tammany people and say I'm available this day? What areas do you cover?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to contact every individual circle compiler. That's the only person who's handling the data compilation and data submission for that circle.
Oh, what's the deadline to sign up? Forgot, that was a very important question.
Before the count day.
Oh, really? So if I don't have to work that 29th, I could actually maybe get to do. If I think I'm not available a day, and I find out I do have that day free, I could contact her. Of course, the worst they could say is, no, we've got everybody. We don't need you. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if I had to like firm up a schedule 2 weeks ahead of time or something.
No, for every area, I try to have commitment from area leaders. But if I know there are people who are still, and again, this year, not particularly the case, but in regular years, if I know there are areas that still have leaders who are willing to take additional participants and helpers and spotters or note takers, then I'll partner them with people as late as possible, so before the count begins. But I try to have it all lined up as far as possible.
Sure. Okay. All right, that's good.
All right, thank you everybody for sticking around.
Thank you.
I see I took a few notes from those that also messaged me in the chat and said they'd like to participate. So again, feel free to email me at katie.percy@audubon.org if you have additional questions or you want additional information. All right, have a good night.
You too. Thank you so much, hon.